The moment the paper ripped echoed louder than a gunshot in the marble-floored bank, because it wasn't just a check that was being torn apart, it was hope itself. A single father stood frozen at the counter, his hands still trembling from the long walk he'd taken to get there, watching $10 million flutter down like useless snow. Around him, polished shoes paused mid-step, keyboards went silent, and the air filled with that sharp, uncomfortable feeling people get when they witness something they'll never forget. No one knew yet that this humiliating moment would soon turn into a reckoning that would shake the entire building. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who keep going when life keeps knocking them down, take a second to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why compassion still matters. The man at the center of that moment was named Daniel Carter, a 38-year-old single dad whose life had been shrinking for years. He had once been an engineer with a steady income and dreams that stretched beyond the horizon, but those dreams collapsed the day his wife died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving him alone with their 6-year-old son, Noah. Grief hollowed him out, but responsibility forced him forward. When Noah was diagnosed with a rare immune disorder that required constant treatment and strict living conditions, Daniel's world narrowed even more. Medical bills replaced savings, overtime replaced sleep, and eventually, even his job disappeared when he couldn't keep up with impossible demands. By the time Daniel walked into the bank that morning, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. His jacket was clean but worn thin at the elbows, his shoes scuffed from miles of walking instead of driving, because his car had been sold long ago to pay for hospital stays. In his pocket was a check that felt heavier than its weight, a check he barely believed was real. It had come from a man named Samuel Whitmore, a reclusive tech billionaire Daniel had once helped years ago, long before life unraveled. Back then, Daniel had volunteered his expertise late into the night to fix a critical system failure that threatened Whitmore's company, refusing payment because it was simply the right thing to do. They lost touch, and Daniel never expected to hear from him again, but Samuel Whitmore remembered. When Whitmore learned through a quiet charity network about Daniel's situation, he didn't send flowers or polite words. He sent a check for $10 million, accompanied by a short note saying it was a debt repaid, nothing more, nothing less. Daniel stared at that check for days, convinced it was a mistake or some elaborate scam, but after verifying every detail he could, desperation outweighed disbelief. That money meant treatments, stability, a safe home for Noah, and freedom from the constant fear of losing everything. The bank Daniel entered was not built for people like him. Glass walls gleamed, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive perfume, and every surface reflected a world of comfort he no longer belonged to. The manager on duty, Karen Blake, noticed him immediately, not because of the check, but because he didn't fit. Her eyes skimmed his clothes, his posture, the tired lines etched into his face, and made a decision before he even spoke. Karen had worked her way up through the ranks with discipline and caution. She prided herself on protecting the bank from fraud, and over time that caution had hardened into suspicion. When Daniel placed the check on the counter, her disbelief turned sharp. $10 million did not belong to men who looked like him, at least not in her world. She examined the check with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, already convinced it was fake. Daniel tried to explain, his voice steady but thin, but Karen barely listened. She focused on the technicalities, on imagined red flags, on her own certainty that this was some kind of attempt to game the system. Other customers watched from a distance, curiosity mixing with judgment. Karen made a show of inspecting the check, then declared it invalid, fraudulent, an insult to the bank's standards. And then, in a gesture meant to end the situation and assert authority, she tore it cleanly in half, then into quarters, letting the pieces fall. The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel didn't shout or beg. He simply stared at the scraps on the counter, his shoulders sagging as if something inside him finally gave up. For a brief moment, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff with nowhere left to go. The thought of returning home to Noah without hope pressed down on his chest so hard it felt impossible to breathe. Karen signaled for security, already moving on in her mind, but fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to her, The bank's regional director, Thomas Hale, was visiting that branch unannounced. He had stepped out of his office moments earlier and witnessed the scene from across the floor. He saw the torn check, the stunned man, and the unmistakable logo and signature on the paper scraps. His steps quickened as recognition hit him like a wave of ice. Thomas Hale knew that signature very well. Samuel Whitmore was not just any billionaire, he was the bank's most powerful private client, a man whose accounts shaped quarterly reports and whose displeasure could end careers. Hale approached the counter, his expression unreadable, and picked up one of the torn pieces. He looked from the check to Daniel, then back to Karen, whose confidence began to falter. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted without a single word needing to be quoted. Hale addressed Daniel with a respect that stopped the room cold, referring to him in a way no one expected, acknowledging him not as a suspect but as someone important. The single word he used carried weight, authority, and recognition, and it cut through the tension like a blade. Karen's face drained of color as realization dawned. This was not a fake check. This was not a mistake that could be brushed aside. This was a catastrophic error. The aftermath unfolded quickly and painfully. Apologies came too late to erase the humiliation, but Hale made immediate calls, confirmed the transaction, and ordered the check reissued within hours. More than that, he insisted the bank cover any inconvenience, offering private rooms, refreshments, and expedited services. None of it could undo what Daniel had felt when hope was ripped apart in front of him, but it was a start. What happened next went beyond money. Samuel Whitmore, informed of the incident, did not rage publicly. Instead, he acted decisively. Karen Blake was removed from her position pending investigation, and mandatory empathy and bias training was instituted across the region. Whitmore also quietly arranged for Daniel to receive not just financial support, but access to the best medical care for Noah, legal assistance, and a trust that would secure his son's future regardless of what came next. Daniel's life did not transform overnight into a fairy tale, but the crushing weight eased. Noah received treatments without delays or compromises. Daniel found stability, then purpose, eventually returning to work in a role that allowed flexibility and dignity. The memory of that day in the bank never fully faded, but it became a reminder rather than a wound, a symbol of how close he came to losing everything and how unexpectedly kindness returned. As this story comes close to its end, take a moment to comment below with a single word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. Near the end of his journey, Daniel often reflected on how easily people are judged by appearances, how quickly dignity can be stripped away by assumption, and how powerful it is when someone chooses to see beyond the surface. He taught Noah that lesson,